Hello everyone, welcome to a Q&A session for the History Valley YouTube channel. My name is Jacob Berman, and tonight I'll be answering questions that any of you have for me, and I'll do the very best I can, to the very best of my ability, to answer them. Hopefully to the satisfaction of those that ask. In the meantime, I suppose I can talk about why a chronological chasm cannot be utilized to find the historical Jesus. That being said, I should edit the title of this stream. I'm going to say, Jesus cannot be found outside the 8030s and Q&A session. Alright. So that's the point of this stream. Jesus cannot be found outside the 8030s. This is a point that I've been making for quite a while, ever since ever since the inception of my research. I've come across people that I've suggested that, as many of you know, that I should try to find Jesus outside of the 10-year reign of Pontius Pilate's administration of Judea. And I've always said that that's impossible. That just cannot be done. Anyone identified with Jesus that did not die during Pilate's tenure as procurator of Judea is wrong. I don't care how many similarities there are between any Jesus, anyone, with the New Testament Jesus. You go outside of those 10 years between Pilate's reign from 26 to 36 AD, I don't want to hear about it. Because in every case I've ever heard about moving Jesus across a different chronology, it's because they found someone else that parallels Jesus in the Gospels in a way that they like it. And they're like, well, let me just conveniently move Jesus to a different time period. That way, it fits my imagination. I'm like, no. That's called bending the evidence to fit your theory. Can't do that. All right, let's accentuate the point here. Let me explain further. You know how this always works. On these live streams, I usually end up pulling up a chronology, and then we end up talking about it. And that's exactly what's going to happen right now. Alright, so Library Office is ready. We got 5 people watching and 2 likes. Anyway, Scoot Booterson says, actually, I'm not even going to bother reading what he said. I'm just going to respond to it. Okay. No, the answer to that question is no. That's nonsense. The Dead Sea Scrolls are authentic. It's literally impossible to fake a text like that. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So someone's going to fake the teacher of righteousness living 390 years after Nebuchadnezzar's death? Are you kidding me? Please. If you say so, oh, come on. That's laughable. I'm sorry. That's laughable. Why did I say I'm sorry? I'm not sorry. That's just ridiculous. People like you that say that don't understand how history works. They just don't. People like you run away to Anatoly Fomenko and say, there was only 1,000 years. No. Not how history works. Alright, let's get back on point before I lose track of this. Alright. You know how I've brought up this point over and over and over again. Even with Paul's epistles. With Paul's epistles, we know that the reign that Jesus died during the reign of Pontius Pilate. Now, does Paul ever mention the reign of Pilate in his actual authentic epistles? No, he doesn't. But I'll tell you what he does mention. Paul fled from Aretas IV of Nabatea, AD 36. Now, how do we know this occurred? Well, Paul says so. 2 Corinthians 11:32. Let's go further. The reign of Aretas happened concurrently. Took place concurrently. Actually, let me put it in a better way. Pontius Pilate reigned at the same time King Aretas IV reigned. And therefore, Paul believed Jesus died during the reign of Pilate. So the point is, we don't need Paul to mention Pilate. All we really need is to see that Paul did believe that Jesus died during Pilate's reign, because he had his vision at Damascus during Pilate's reign. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Now, I feel like addressing that comment about the Dead Sea Scrolls. One last thing I'll say about it is this. There was a museum that housed Dead Sea Scrolls, and it turned out to be fake. Just at that museum. That doesn't mean the entire collection of the scrolls everywhere else is fake. Okay? That's that. And I hope that will take care of anyone else that says that nonsense. Please don't ever ask me that nonsense. You're just going to get a response from me. I'm not gonna like it, and I'm just gonna say the same thing I just said a few moments ago. Okay, Michael Willis made a comment. Now this is a comment. This is something I like. When people ask me this question, this makes more sense. So Michael Willis says, granting that the canonical parables have undergone editorial revision, do you think that most or even all of these parables come from the same author, teacher, a Galilean teacher? I don't know. No, I don't think so. Not really. Remember, in last live stream, I demonstrated that Paul believed that the teacher of righteousness, or Yeshua the high priest, same person. He lived about 200 years before Jesus, in the 170s BCE. We are told that by Paul that he believed that Jesus did exist in the past, and that he thinks that Jesus returned in the 1st century CE. Without saying so many words, Paul is essentially telling us that he thought Jesus reincarnated in the 1st century CE as a Roman client king. He doesn't think Jesus came back as some revolutionary. He's not preaching that at all. He's preaching to the Jews that follow that he's preaching to the Jewish people and telling them, follow the example of King Bazus. Be a good, loyal citizen to Rome. Okay, let's read a couple more comments. Lamar Pope says, peace, family. How are you doing, Lamar? Brett says, could it be that Jesus was redacted, removed from any historical document? Has anyone expressed that theory? That is arbitrary speculation, and I won't entertain it. I can't entertain it. The testimonium is good enough for me. Somebody called Jesus crucified by Pilate. Let's just leave it at that. That's all I need to know. Anything else is unnecessary. All right. When did Paul have his vision? Paul has his vision on AD 31. That's when he had his vision. Okay? How do I know it happened on AD 31? Well, I've explained how I know that. And I think it's safe to say I've proven it several times by restating the same evidence over and over again. But you know what? Just for fun, let's restate the evidence. All right. I'm going to cite the exact verses this time. Gotta take a look at it because I don't remember exactly where it is. It's 2 Corinthians 12:2. Okay. 2 Corinthians 12:2 mentions that Paul had his vision 14 years before his Corinthian argument. Galatians, and I don't remember where in Galatians it says this, so I know it's in Galatians 2:1 it mentions the 14 years. In Galatians 1:18. And Galatians 2:1 mentions 3 years and 14 years, respectively, which adds up to 17 years. Thus, 14 years in 2 Corinthians plus 17 years in Galatians equals 31 years. All right. Let me fix some of this. All right, so it's 31 years before the James, before the James argument took place. You see? Before the James argument took place. If any of you have any more questions, please throw them in the chat. Anyway, let's link it. And if you want to support the channel, throw in a super chat. Would appreciate it. Or go to Patreon or PayPal. All right, let's get back to the game here. So 31 minus 62 AD, which is when James was executed by Paul, equals 31 AD. You see? All you gotta do is follow Paul's chronology. And everything else works itself out. It's that simple. Doesn't need to happen any other way. So yes. Anyway, I'm going to take a moment to respond to Ralph Ellis. Ralph Ellis wrote an article against me recently, claiming that I'm wrong. He says that he insists that Paul is Josephus, like usual, and he says that, listen, he's like, the book of Acts reveals that Paul fled from Damascus in the AD 60s, not in the AD 30s. Oh, and of course, where does it say this in Acts? In the first person passages of Acts of the Apostles, or in the third person? In the third person. In other words, Ellis is relying on a later version of the book of Acts that is absolute trash. The one that's mishmashing chronologies. That document. Sorry, Ellis. Paul's epistles takes priority over the book of Acts. The version we have any day. Any day. So no. We're not going to move Paul into the AD 60s so that he can be the same person as Josephus. We're not doing that. Because Paul is not Josephus. I've made this point countless times on this channel. And I'm not alone on that. Paul is not Josephus. They don't even believe in the same God, for crying out loud. I'm like, at least in Jesus. Josephus doesn't speak highly of Jesus. Paul does. And Josephus cares not one tittle for Jesus. He's too busy with Yohanan ben Zakkai preaching that Emperor Vespasian was the coming of the son of King David that all the Jews have been waiting for. That's not what Paul was doing. And I've never seen a good argument to claim, because here's the truth, to claim what Ellis is saying, and he won't admit this, but this is the truth. In order to accept what he's saying, every Pauline epistle would have to be a total and absolute forgery based on nothing that Paul wrote before AD 70, which is impossible. That just cannot be done. There's no good argument for that. Too many problems. All right, somebody could say, Paul's epistles aren't mentioned before Marcion. How do you explain Clement being aware of Paul's ministry in the mid-90s then? How do you explain Clement writing the book of Hebrews, which doesn't make any sense unless there are Pauline epistles before Hebrews? How do we explain the compression? What happened? Did they compress 3 different letters to the Philippians and merge it into one letter? Because we know they did. We know there were 3 letters to the Philippians that Paul wrote. They've been compressed into one letter. So you're telling me they forged all of them? All the original separate letters to the Corinthians, to the Philippians, and to the other churches? Are we really going to say that they forged them and then compressed the forgeries? Get out of here. No. That's ridiculous. That's too much. That's nonsense. Now, the letters that we have of Paul, they have been compressed. We know they have. Philippians says greetings and goodbye 3 different times. 3 times. And I've never seen a good argument that Josephus is Paul. Never. And never will. Because this is one of the things that we just know is wrong. We just know it's wrong. We just know. Alright. Enough of Ralph Ellis. Let's get back to the topic at hand. So, what happened on 31 AD at the same time as the vision? Ananias preaches anti-circumcision, that is. I just need to make room to type the rest properly. It just looks squished in there. At Adiabene, King Bazus dies, and Paul has a vision. Paul has a vision, right? Excuse me. Alright. So now what? Well, the next point we're going to do here, because on this video while I'm at it, we're going to straighten out some issues. We're going to straighten out some issues, and pretty soon here I'm going to be doing a pre-recorded video It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be one of the biggest videos I've ever done, analyzing the parallels between Paul and Ananias ben Ananias, and explaining that Paul and Galatians. Because the other videos I did recently, they came out the wrong way. I'm not abandoning the theory that I recently revived, that I came up with a while back about Ananias and Paul. I'm not abandoning it. The evidence is there. But I need to re-explain it. There's some details that needs to be re-explained. Alright, so Ananias ben Ananias kills James on AD 62. Alright? Let's remember that. Now, what happened on AD 62? Paul writes, there's no reason to have his name in italics. Okay. Paul writes Galatians. Now watch this. The next part gets interesting. Josephus says, after the death of James and the removal of Ananias from power, we're told that Saul, someone called Saul, a kinsman of Agrippa, begins to riot with his brother Costobarus. He starts to riot, and he starts to cause problems in Judea. Now, Ananias is supposed to have been removed from power in early 63 AD when Governor Albinus arrived in Judea. It might have been late AD 62, but it looks like AD 63 is the answer. Now, here's the other thing. Paul writes something else that's very interesting here in Galatians. He says, I cannot rebuild what I have destroyed in Galatians 2:18. He says, for if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. Transgressor of the law, that is. Why does he say that? Paul says that he cannot rebuild what he has destroyed, otherwise he would be a law breaker. Now, what was the argument about with James? It was about the law. And Ananias kills James, right? Recognitions of Clement says that Paul killed James. Now we have a problem here. We know Ananias taught Paul, and yet it appears in certain places in Galatians and in recognitions, Ananias appears as Paul. So there's a double. There's a body double in Galatians. That's the way it's being written. There's two people in Galatians being referred to as Paul. That is a conclusion that I found to be inescapable. Therefore, the hypothesis that I came to about Paul and Ananias last year, and that in which I recently revived just has to be correct, regardless of what anyone else tells me. There's no other way to explain Galatians. So based on the evidence that Galatians is aware of the death of James, it must be that Paul wrote it in response to the death of James. Okay, to the murder of James would be the more correct thing to say. So, we have someone calling himself Paul writing the letters before AD 70. I've discussed in the past, not so long ago, that in sorry, not second, and First Thessalonians and Second Corinthians and First Corinthians, we are told that more than one person offered the authentic letters of Paul. More than one person. Think about that for a minute. If more than one person wrote the letters of Paul, and they are authentic, and I don't dispute that, yeah, they're authentic, they represent real history, for sure, then it shouldn't be any surprise that Ananias and Paul overlap, and they both end up being referred to as Paul in the epistles. All right. Let's make a number list. So that way, what I'm saying can be better understood. Where is it? There we are. Paul argues against Cephas, or Cephas, over circumcision. Paul kills James just like Ananias. Ben Ananias does. Ananias argued against Eleazar over circumcision. Y'all see the parallels? Paul is a Herodian, just like Saul the Herodian. Paul is called Saul in the we document of Acts. Yet, Paul is taught by Barnabas and Ananias. I should say Banus hyphen Barnabas and Ananias in their parentheses, because that's essentially what's happening. So there's a doublet identity in Galatians. Conclusion. Paul offered the letters and yet Paul also appears as a title for both Saul and Ananias. So that was a long point there. That seems rather clear. So Saul is the scribe, and clearly he's writing these letters describing the ministry of Ananias. Of course, he has details that he describes to us about his own life experience, making Paul and Barnabas distinct characters in the stories that he tells us about. Of course, we must remember Tertius replaced Ananias with Barnabas on AD, well, no later than AD 94. Say 94 because let's give Clement a year to digest Tertius's redaction of the letters before he writes Hebrews. Do any of you have any more questions for me before I continue? Brett Forsyth has donated $5. Thank you. Means a lot, man. Really appreciate it. All right. So in the long run, we can see who the real apostle is in this story. We can see that Tertius redacts and compresses the Pauline epistles into 7 letters. You see, that's the interesting thing. We don't get the 7 letters of Paul as we have them until after Josephus. Okay, let's say AD 94, because 95 is the year that Clement pumps out his own material. And then on the same year, Epaphroditus does his own stuff, and we'll get to that later. That's a lot for one video. Okay. Numbell ever says, you say Tertius wrote Hebrews? No. Clement wrote Hebrews. Pope Clement. That's clear if we read the Epistle to the Corinthians by Pope Clement. He's the first one to describe a high priestly Jesus. That's nowhere to be found in the authentic Pauline epistles, nor in the compressed Pauline epistles. Now, later on, I'll get into when the original letters, when we decompress the Pauline epistles, so that we may gaze upon the authentic letters themselves. I meant to say. Then everything will reveal itself. Everything will be clear. Everything will become clear. Non-Bell ever says, okay, thanks. No problem, man. No problem. Okay. Remember, Tertius replaced Ananias because the latter killed James. Now, why did he do that? Because he killed James. Ananias killed James, and he was the one that tutored Saul, the author of our letters. Now, here's the thing. We know that Paul is Saul the Herodian because we're told that in Romans 16, that he is a Herodian, and Saul is the Hebrew form of Paul. And Paul is the Greek form of Saul. It's as simple as that. But let's take a look at the we document of Acts before I end this video, because it's already 33 minutes. So some of you may be asking, the we document of Acts, which text represents the we document of Acts? Well, there's some text in Acts of the Apostles that has the word, it uses the words we, I. And so it breaks away from they did this and they did that. Now, to be honest, I don't have it right in front of me, so I have to go find it real quick. So if the viewers can be just a little bit patient with me, we will get through this. I just have to find it. If I can find it. We document of Acts. This will just have to do. Okay. Let's go to the book of Acts instead. We're going to hit find, and we're going to type 2 letters, W and E. Now, there are many words in Acts, obviously, that contain the word we within other words, like, you know. Yeah, this isn't going to work. I just don't have it in front of me. All right, let me just go to an example here. Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, None. Acts 2:11. Instead, we're going to take a look at Acts 27, or Acts 28. Acts 28, chapter 28, that is a fine example of the we document. And I'm gazing upon it right now. So let's bring it up on screen so all of you can see this. Hold on a second. That's weird. Why is it appearing on the screen like that? All right, so Acts 28 has the word we all over it. All over it. Now, here's the problem. Oh, look at this here. And when we were escaped, then we knew that the island was called Malta. That's Melita, sorry. That's Malta. And the barbarians showed us no common kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us all, because of the present rain and because of the cold. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on fire, a viper came out by reason of the heat and fastened on his hand. And when the barbarians saw the venomous creature hanging from his hand, they said one to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped from the sea, yet justice had not suffered to live. It's an interesting statement. Paul is being called a murderer. A murderer. And this is in Acts, the we document of Acts. Oh, wait a minute. No. Let's underline it. Put that in yellow. Y'all see this? This is what I wanted to show y'all. And the we document of Acts, which is written before the Gospels, before the redaction, before all of it. It represents early material that was preserved by someone that wanted to make sure that Paul's life survived any redactions, any forgeries, all of that. What do y'all think of that? Now, this is before recognitions of Clement, before the Acts of the Apostles that we know was written. Way before all of that. And look who doesn't appear here. Barnabas. As a matter of fact, the first text that enters, that switches Acts into a first-person mode, into first-person narration, is Acts 16:10. Acts 16:10. And Barnabas never shows up, ever, once after Acts 16:10. Now, not all of Acts after Acts 16:10 mentions the we document. Okay, it's not. I wish all of it was the we document after Acts 16:10. That would give us plenty of pre-war material, but it's not. So Paul's called a murderer. Why? Who did he kill? He killed James. And if Ananias killed James too, then it seems like early Christian literature was under some sort of impression that, yes, while someone else called Paul wrote our epistles, in the long run, the Paul that's behind the Paul is Ananias ben Ananias. He's distinguished from the author of the epistles when he's called Barnabas. But that's not always so. Yes, in the long run, he is Barnabas. But that doesn't change a damn thing. That doesn't. If the evidence is too powerful for me to dismiss it. Recently, I thought maybe I was on the wrong path there, and I wasn't. I wasn't. Sometimes it's good to doubt oneself, recheck the evidence, and then end up finding more evidence. This is one of those days where that's taken place. And that's really clear from here. So expect another show on Ananias and the original Paul the Apostle. We're getting into more parallels. We're keeping Ananias in here. Never again will he be tossed out of the story. There's too much evidence for this. I'm not going to throw it out. I refuse to. He may not have written the epistles, that's for sure. He didn't write the epistles. The author of the epistles was writing doublet parallels, which indicates that he seems to be masking Ananias as Paul, as if he were him. Remember, Paul is masking himself as Ananias, as Paul. Remember in Iron Man 3, if any of you have seen the movie Iron Man 3, the Mandarin, that's the antagonist of the movie, has a body double called the Mandarin, and the Mandarin is using that body double so that way nobody will figure out who he really is. That's the same relationship going on between Paul and Barnabas. Remember, Paul means small, and Barnabas is the senior of the story. Paul is the junior here. Who's Paul's senior? Now, that's not because they're father and son. They're not father and son. Paul is a member of the Herodian family. He's not going to be the son of Ananias, but Ananias. Paul is probably... Actually, I prefer not to say right now. I'm still working on the evidence of deciphering who Paul's parents were likely to be. I have no doubt that his parents were mentioned somewhere. It's only a matter of finding out who. But clearly they would have been members of the Herodian family. I have my suspicions, but I need to work more on that. Alright, so let's copy and paste this. This is Acts 28:4. That's what it is. Let's get back to the library office. So this is something that's too powerful to dismiss. There's no other explanation for this. And I've seen some people say that nothing in Acts goes back to an earlier pre-redactive material. I'm like, no. The we document is in Acts. It's not written by the same person that wrote Acts of the Apostles, but it's in there. Acts 28:4. Well, it may be in first person, but it doesn't change anything, because just a couple of verses before that it says, "And we were escaped, and we knew that the island was called Malta." I read that earlier, or Melita, in the translation of Acts I'm reading. So yes, there are verses. There are first person verses just before that. And the person that's writing these texts was part of Paul's expeditions. So this changes nothing. It's called the we document of Acts. Just the we document. However, the book of Acts that we have is called Acts of the Apostles, which is written by someone else that incorporated an earlier material that we just don't have. But we have it in fragments contained within Acts of the Apostles. Just like most of the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarian documents were written 200 years before Jesus. But they have been redacted to include some material from the 1st century CE. This is no different. Acts of the Apostles is a 2nd century CE material, but it contains a document that's been rewritten within it that dates to somewhere around 68 to 70 CE. Ocuzio says, like we, yes, literally, we document of Acts. That's right. All right, everyone, I'm going to be getting off now. Thanks for watching. If any of you have any more questions while I prepare for the ending of the show, throw it in there, and I'll do the best I can to answer. I think y'all got about a minute before I get ready to end this, so be quick about it. Okay. Let me see here if any of you have asked questions. Dumbbell Lover says, thanks, Jacob. Oh, no problem, man. Anytime. All right, guys. So y'all know the drill. Patreon, PayPal, all that stuff. If any of you want to support this channel financially, y'all can do that. You can go through PayPal or Patreon. I'll take y'all to the benefits. Here we go. So there are 6 tiers for y'all to select. And there's PayPal. If y'all want to do one-time donations there instead, y'all can do that. Would appreciate it. Pseudo Zardo says, thanks, Jacob. Good night. You're welcome, man. Glad y'all enjoyed the stream. I'll see y'all later.